The desert sun beat down mercilessly, as Weston Xanders spotted something unusual against the sprawling oak tree in the distance. Squinting through the heat waves rising from the parched earth, he tugged gently on his horse's reins, steering the chestnut mare toward what appeared to be a human figure slumped against the gnarled trunk. As he drew closer, his suspicions were confirmed. A young woman was fast asleep beneath the sparse shade, her body curled protectively around a small leather satchel, her face smudged with dirt and what might have been dried tears. San Antonio, Texas, 1876. The railroad had brought prosperity to some, but hardship to many. Weston had seen enough struggling souls in his 26 years to recognize one more. Dismounting quietly, he approached with caution, not wanting to startle her. Her clothes were travel-worn but of decent quality, suggesting she hadn't always lived rough. Her auburn hair had escaped what once must have been a neat bun, tendrils framing a face that, despite its current state, possessed a quiet beauty that made Weston's heart skip a beat. He cleared his throat softly then, when that failed to rouse her, knelt beside her and touched her shoulder with the gentlest pressure. "Miss," he said, his voice deliberately low and unthreatening. "Miss, are you all right?" The woman startled awake, her blue eyes flying open with alarm. She immediately scrambled backward, pressing herself against the tree, her hand flying to her side where Weston noticed a small knife concealed in the folds of her skirt. "Easy now," he said, raising his palms in a gesture of peace. "I mean no harm, just passing through and saw you here." "When did you last eat?" The woman stared at him, suspicion and weariness battling across her features. Her lips were cracked from dehydration, and now that she was awake, Weston could see the hollowness in her cheeks. "Yesterday morning," she finally answered, her voice hoarse. "Or maybe the day before. The days have blurred together." Weston nodded, unsurprised. He reached slowly toward his saddlebag, telegraphing his movements. "Name's Weston Xanders. I've got jerky and hardtack in my pack and water in my canteen. You're welcome to some." She hesitated, clearly torn between hunger and distrust. "Josephine," she finally offered. "Josephine Miller." "Well, Miss Miller, you look about ready to fall over, and I can't in good conscience ride away and leave you here to bake in this Texas sun." He pulled out his canteen and held it out to her. "Drink first. Slowly now." Her hand trembled as she reached for the canteen, and their fingers brushed momentarily. Something electric passed between them, causing her to draw back slightly before her thirst overcame her caution. She drank carefully, rationing the water as someone accustomed to scarcity would. "Thank you," she said, handing it back with reluctance. I'm not usually so unprepared or so trusting of strangers." "These aren't usual times, I reckon," Weston replied, now offering her a strip of dried beef and a piece of hardtack. "And I'm not asking for your trust, just offering a meal and maybe a ride to wherever you're headed if it's on my way." Josephine took the food, biting into the jerky with restrained hunger. "And where might you be headed, Mr. Xanders?" "My ranch, about 15 miles north of San Antonio, just coming back from town with supplies." He gestured to the laden packhorse tethered behind his mare. "I don't know where I'm headed," she admitted after swallowing. "Just away." Weston didn't press, but he'd seen that look before, the look of someone running from something or someone. He'd worn it himself years ago. "Well," he said, settling himself more comfortably on the ground, "my offer stands. The ranch has plenty of room, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, could use a hand with the cooking and cleaning if you're willing to work. At least until you figure out your next move." Josephine studied him, wariness still evident in her posture. "Why would you help a stranger?" Weston shrugged, his weathered face softening. "Because someone once did the same for me when I needed it most. Besides, Mrs. Abernathy is near 70 and stubborn as an old mule. Won't admit she needs help, but she does." A ghost of a smile touched Josephine's lips, transforming her face. "And you're certain she'd welcome company?" "She's been telling me for years I need to find a wife to bring some feminine sensibility to the place," he said with a chuckle. "Having you around might quiet her on that front for a spell." Josephine's expression clouded momentarily, and Weston wondered what he'd said wrong. She set down the half-eaten hardtack and brushed crumbs from her skirt. "I should tell you, Mr. Xanders, that I may bring trouble to your door. I wouldn't want to repay your kindness with danger." Weston's face grew serious. "Miss Miller, this is Texas. Trouble is as common as dust storms and twice as persistent. Whatever you're running from, you'll find no judgment from me. But you should know that my ranch hands are loyal, and I'm handy with both words and weapons when the situation calls for it." He stood and offered her his hand. "What do you say? A meal, a safe place to sleep, and honest work if you want it. No strings attached, and you can leave whenever you please." Josephine looked up at him, at his outstretched hand with its calluses and small scars that spoke of years of honest labor. She glanced at the vast, empty landscape around them, then back to his steady gaze. Slowly, she placed her hand in his and allowed him to help her to her feet. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I accept your offer, Mr. Xanders." "Weston," he corrected with a smile. "If we're going to be sharing a roof, might as well use my given name." "Josephine, then," she responded, the ghost of a smile returning. "Though most called me Josie. Before." Weston nodded, not questioning the before that clearly marked a division in her life. He helped her gather her meager belongings, noting that her small satchel contained little more than a change of clothes, a worn book of poetry, and a locket with a broken chain. Once she was settled on his horse, he insisted on walking and leading the animals himself. They set off toward the Xanders ranch, the midday sun beating down on their backs as they left the lone oak tree behind. The journey to Weston's ranch passed mostly in silence, with Josephine occasionally asking questions about the surrounding landscape or his property. Weston answered freely, describing the modest but thriving cattle operation he'd built over the past 6 years. "It's not fancy," he explained as they crested a hill and the ranch came into view in the distance. "But it's mine, free and clear. Started with 10 acres and 20 head of cattle. Now we're up to 200 acres and over 100 head." Josephine took in the sight of the ranch house, a sturdy 2-story structure built of local stone and timber, flanked by a barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. A windmill turned lazily in the afternoon breeze, and several cowboys were visible in the distance, moving cattle between pastures. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. "You've built something real here." Weston glanced up at her, struck by the genuine admiration in her voice. "Thank you. It hasn't been easy, but it's been worth every callous and sleepless night." As they approached the main house, a stout older woman emerged onto the porch, shading her eyes against the sun. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, but her face broke into a smile when she spotted Weston. "About time you got back," she called. "Was beginning to think you'd decided to take up permanent residence in town." Then her gaze shifted to Josephine, and her eyebrows rose in surprise. "Mrs. Abernathy," Weston said as they reached the house. "This is Miss Josephine Miller. She'll be staying with us for a while." "Miss Miller, this is Mrs. Abernathy, the backbone of this entire operation, though don't tell her that or she'll get even more impossible to manage." The older woman snorted, but her eyes twinkled as she assessed Josephine. "Picked up another stray, did you, Weston? Well, at least this one's prettier than that 3-legged coyote pup you brought home last spring." Josephine blinked in surprise at the comparison, but Weston just laughed and helped her down from the horse. "Miss Miller needs a hot meal and a place to rest, Mrs. A. I found her out by the old oak, looking like she hadn't eaten in days." Mrs. Abernathy's expression softened immediately. "Well then, come on in, child. I've got stew simmering and fresh bread cooling. Nothing fancy, but it'll put some color back in those cheeks." Josephine turned to Weston, uncertainty in her eyes. "I don't want to impose nonsense," Mrs. Abernathy interrupted, taking Josephine by the arm. "Any friend of Weston's is welcome here. Besides, I've been cooking for men so long I've forgotten what it's like to have female company. You come right in and tell me all about yourself while this one," she jerked her thumb at Weston, "sees to the horses." Weston caught Josephine's eye and nodded reassuringly. "Go on. I'll be in shortly." As Mrs. Abernathy led Josephine into the house, Weston heard the older woman already peppering her with questions. "Now then, how did a nice-looking girl like you end up under that old oak tree? Don't answer that if you don't want to. Lord knows we've all got stories we'd rather not tell. But you do look familiar somehow. Are you from around these parts originally?" Weston smiled to himself as he led the horses toward the barn. Mrs. Abernathy had that effect on people. Her motherly concern, wrapped in gruff practicality, had a way of putting even the most guarded souls at ease. He hoped it would work on Josephine, who clearly carried burdens heavier than her small satchel suggested. By the time Weston had unsaddled and brushed down the horses, fed them, and stored his supplies, the sun was beginning to lower in the western sky. He washed up at the pump outside the barn, doing his best to make himself presentable before heading back to the main house. Inside, he found Josephine seated at the kitchen table, a half-eaten bowl of stew before her. She'd clearly washed up as well, her face now clean of dirt, her auburn hair neatly combed and rebraided. Mrs. Abernathy had apparently loaned her a dress as well, a simple blue cotton garment that was slightly too large but clean and serviceable. "There you are, Mrs. Abernathy said, ladling stew into a bowl for him. "Sit down before it gets cold. Miss Miller here was just telling me she worked as a schoolteacher back in Missouri." Weston raised an eyebrow as he took his seat. "A schoolteacher? Well, that explains the book of poetry." Josephine nodded, a hint of color in her cheeks. "Yes, for almost 2 years in a small town outside of Kansas City. I taught children from 6 to 16, all in one room." "Imagine that," Mrs. Abernathy said, placing a thick slice of bread beside Weston's stew. "And here we are with no proper school for 20 miles. The Dawson children and the Hendersons' brood have to ride all that way just for basic learning." Weston caught the calculating look in the housekeeper's eye and nearly choked on his first spoonful of stew. "Mrs. A. Miss Miller is our guest, not a solution to the county's educational shortcomings." "I'm just saying," the older woman replied innocently. "A trained teacher right here in our midst seems like Providence to me." Josephine looked between them, a small, genuine smile playing at her lips for the first time. "I wouldn't mind teaching again, actually. It was the one thing I truly loved about my old life." Something in her tone caught Weston's attention. There was a wistfulness there, but also a shadow, as if the memory brought both joy and pain. He wanted to ask more, but sensed she wasn't ready to share the full story. "Well," he said instead, "let's get you settled in first. There will be plenty of time to discuss what you might want to do next." After the meal, Mrs. Abernathy showed Josephine to a spare bedroom on the second floor. Weston remained downstairs, going over accounts at his desk in the small study off the main sitting room. He was so absorbed in his work that he didn't hear Josephine's approach until she spoke from the doorway. "Your housekeeper is quite a character," she said softly. Weston looked up, startled but pleased to see her. "That she is. Been with me since I bought this place. Came with the property. In a manner of speaking, she was the previous owner's cook and refused to leave when I took over. Said I'd starve to death within a month without her. Would you have? Josephine asked, a hint of teasing in her voice. Probably, he admitted with a laugh. I could barely boil water back then. Was a greenhorn through and through, city boy from Boston with big dreams and not much else. Josephine's eyebrows rose. Boston? I wouldn't have guessed. Lost the accent years ago, he said. Had to be taken seriously out here. But yes, I came west after the war with my father's inheritance and a head full of romantic notions about ranching. And did it live up to your expectations? Weston considered the question, setting down his pencil. No, he said honestly. It was harder, dirtier, and more heartbreaking than I ever imagined. Lost half my cattle that first winter to disease. Nearly got myself killed breaking a wild Mustang the second year. But, he added, his eyes meeting hers, it's also been more rewarding than I could have dreamed. There's something about building something with your own two hands, watching it grow and thrive despite all odds. He trailed off, suddenly self-conscious about his enthusiasm. I'm boring you with ranch talk. Not at all, Josephine said, stepping fully into the room. It's refreshing to hear someone speak so passionately about their work, about anything, really. Something in her tone made Weston wonder about the life she'd left behind. What had drained the passion from her voice, left those shadows in her eyes. Will you tell me? He asked gently. Not now, not if you don't want to, but someday, will you tell me what brought you to that tree? Josephine's expression clouded, and for a moment Weston thought he'd overstepped. But then she nodded slowly. Someday, she promised. When I'm sure it won't bring danger to your door. You've been kinder than I deserve, Mr. Zan Weston. I won't repay that by being dishonest with you. But some stories need the right time to be told. I understand, he said, and he did. Everyone on the frontier had a past, himself included. Some were running toward something, others running away. The difference was rarely as important as what they did with the fresh start they found. No pressure. Just know that when you're ready, I'm willing to listen. Josephine smiled gratefully. Thank you, and thank you for the room, it's lovely. Mrs. Abernathy said it was your mother's bedroom suite. Weston nodded. My parents visited once about 4 years ago, had the furniture shipped all the way from Boston at great expense. They stayed 3 weeks, decided they hated Texas and went back east. Haven't seen them since, though we correspond occasionally. I'm sorry, Josephine said. Don't be. We're different people with different dreams. They love their social circles and cultural events. I love. He gestured broadly, encompassing the ranch beyond the walls, all of this, the space, the freedom, the heat and the dust, she added with a small laugh. Those too, he agreed, smiling. Even the rattlesnakes and the occasional cattle thief. It's all part of the package. Their eyes met across the desk, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits despite their different journeys. Mrs. Abernathy's voice broke the spell. Miss Miller, I've drawn you a bath while there's still hot water. Better get to it before it cools. Josephine started, a blush rising to her cheeks. I should go. Thank you again, Weston. Sleep well, Josephine, he replied. Tomorrow's a new day. As she turned to leave, he added, and Josephine, welcome to the Xanders ranch. The smile she gave him over her shoulder stayed with him long after she'd gone, warming his thoughts as he returned to his ledgers in the quiet of the evening. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with the promise of another scorching summer day. Weston had already been up for hours, meeting with his foreman Diego Ramirez about the day's work, when Josephine appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked refreshed after a night's sleep, wearing another of Mrs. Abernathy's lone dresses, This one altered somewhat to better fit her smaller frame. "Good morning," she said, a touch of uncertainty in her voice. "I hope I'm not too late for breakfast." "Not at all," Weston replied, rising from the table. "Mrs. A always keeps the coffee hot until at least 9. Help yourself to whatever you'd like." He gestured to the stove where a pot of oatmeal simmered and a plate of biscuits sat warming. Diego stood as well, nodding politely to Josephine. "Miss Miller, a pleasure to meet you. Weston mentioned you'd be staying with us for a while." "This is Diego Ramirez," Weston introduced. "Been my right hand since the beginning. Knows more about ranching than I'll ever learn." "He gives me too much credit," Diego said with a modest shrug, though his pride in Weston's recognition was evident. "I was just leaving, Miss Miller. Enjoy your breakfast." Once Diego had departed, Josephine helped herself to a small serving of oatmeal and took a seat across from Weston. "He seems nice," she commented, reaching for the honey pot to sweeten her breakfast. "He's the best," Weston agreed. "Saved me from my own stupidity more times than I can count those first few years. Loyal to a fault, and the men respect him." Josephine nodded, taking a careful bite of her oatmeal. After a moment, she said, "I'd like to earn my keep while I'm here. Mrs. Abernathy mentioned needing help with the mending, and I'm quite good with a needle. I could also help with the cooking, although I should warn you my skills are rather basic." "You don't need to, I want to," she interrupted firmly. "I've never been comfortable accepting charity, and I've always made my own way. That's important to me." Weston studied her for a moment, seeing the determined set of her jaw. "All right," he conceded, "but don't let Mrs. A work you too hard. She can be quite the taskmaster when she gets going." "I heard that," came the housekeeper's voice from the pantry. She emerged a moment later, arms laden with preserves. "And I resent the implication. I'm the soul of reasonableness." Weston coughed into his coffee cup, earning a glare from the older woman. "Don't you have cattle to tend to?" Mrs. Abernathy asked pointedly. "I surely do," he agreed, rising from the table. He drained the last of his coffee and set the cup down. "I'll be back for dinner, unless something comes up. Josephine, feel free to explore the property if you'd like. Just don't wander too far alone. The land can be deceptive if you're not familiar with it." "I'll keep that in mind," she promised. As Weston left the kitchen, he heard Mrs. Abernathy already laying out the day's chores. "Now then, those curtains in the sitting room have needed taking down and washing for an age, and there's a pile of mending that would make a mountain weep." Weston smiled to himself as he stepped out onto the porch. Something about having Josephine in the house made it feel different, warmer somehow, more like a home than just a place to sleep and eat between workdays. It was a dangerous thought, he knew. She'd made no promises to stay, and her mysterious past clearly still haunted her. But he couldn't help the hope that sparked in his chest when he thought of her possibly making a place for herself at the ranch. The day passed in a blur of activity, as most did on a working cattle ranch. Weston rode out with several hands to check on a section of fence that had been reported damaged, possibly by rustlers testing the boundaries. They found the break and repaired it, noting fresh hoof prints that suggested someone had indeed been scouting the property. "Want me to organize extra patrols tonight, boss?" asked Thomas Jenkins, one of the more experienced hands. "Might not be a bad idea," Weston agreed, frowning at the tracks. "Have the men ride in pairs and tell them to be alert but not trigger-happy. Last thing we need is to shoot some lost traveler by mistake." By the time they returned to the ranch, the sun was already low in the western sky, painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber. As they approached the main house, Weston was surprised to see Josephine sitting on the front porch, a book in her hands. She looked up as they rode in, shading her eyes against the setting sun. After seeing to his horse, Weston made his way to the porch, curious about how she'd spent her day. "Enjoying the evening?" he asked, climbing the steps to join her. Josephine marked her place in the book. He recognized it as her volume of poetry and set it aside. "Very much. Your library is impressive for a ranch house. I hope you don't mind that I borrowed a few volumes." "Not at all," he replied, settling into the chair beside her. "Most of those books were bought more for appearance than reading, I'm afraid. My mother insisted I needed cultural touchstones when I moved west, said it would keep me civilized." Josephine laughed softly. "And did it? Who knows? Maybe without Shakespeare and Dickens watching over me, I'd be completely feral by now." Her laughter grew, a sound that lightened Weston's heart after the long, dusty day. "I doubt that very much," she said. "You seem quite civilized to me, Mr. Xanders." "High praise from a schoolteacher," he replied with a grin. "Speaking of which, Mrs. mentioned you were asking about the local children and their schooling situation." Josephine nodded, her expression turning more serious. "Yes." She said the nearest school is in San Antonio, much too far for daily travel for most children. Some families hire tutors if they can afford it, but many children here receive only the most basic education from their parents, if that. "That's true," Weston acknowledged. "It's been a concern for many of the local families. There's been talk of establishing a proper school closer to the outlying ranches, but no one's taken the initiative yet." "It's a shame," Josephine said, gazing out at the landscape. "Education opens so many doors, especially for children born in remote places like this. Without it, their worlds remain small, their opportunities limited." Weston studied her profile, struck by the passion in her voice. "You really love teaching, don't you?" "It's the one thing I've always been certain of," she admitted. "Even as a young girl, I knew I wanted to teach. My father thought it a waste of time. Why educate a daughter who would only marry and have children? But my mother insisted. She'd been denied education herself and was determined I would have what she hadn't." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Josephine said softly, and Weston noted the past tense. "She died when I was 15, consumption." "I'm sorry," he said gently. Josephine acknowledged his sympathy with a small nod. "It was a long time ago, but I became a teacher because of her, to honor her belief in me, in a way." The vulnerability in her admission touched Weston deeply. It was the first real glimpse she'd offered into her past, and he understood the trust that represented. "Well," he said after a moment, "if you're truly interested in teaching while you're here, perhaps we could arrange something. The bunkhouse has a common room that's hardly used during the day. With some simple furniture, it could serve as a temporary schoolroom." Josephine turned to him, surprise and hope lighting her features. "Really? You wouldn't mind?" "Why would I mind? Education is important, as you said, and it would be a service to the community. I could send word to the neighboring ranches that we're offering schooling for their children. Most are within riding distance if they only have to make the trip a few times a week." "That would be wonderful," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. "I could develop a curriculum based on what I taught in Missouri, adapted for different ages and abilities. We'd need books, of course, and slates," and she broke off, suddenly self-conscious about her enthusiasm. "I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I?" "Not at all," Weston assured her, charmed by her passion. "I think it's a fine idea. We can ride into San Antonio next week to purchase whatever supplies you need. Consider it an investment in the future of Texas." Josephine's smile was radiant. "Thank you, Weston. This means more to me than you know." Before he could respond, Mrs. Abernathy's voice called from inside the house. "Dinner's ready, you two. Come in before it gets cold." As they rose to go inside, Josephine impulsively reached out and squeezed Weston's hand. "Thank you," she said again. her blue eyes meeting his with unmistakable gratitude. The brief touch of her hand sent a jolt through Weston's system that had nothing to do with gratitude, and everything to do with the growing attraction he felt toward her. But he knew better than to act on such feelings. She was still a mystery in many ways, still healing from whatever had driven her to flee her previous life. Instead, he simply nodded and held the door for her, following her into the warm light of the kitchen, where Mrs. Abernathy had prepared a feast that would have put many fine Boston restaurants to shame. The next few days fell into an easy rhythm. Josephine helped Mrs. Abernathy with household tasks in the mornings, then spent her afternoons planning for the school, writing out lesson plans, and making lists of needed supplies. Weston, busy with ranch work, saw her mainly at mealtimes, but found himself looking forward to those moments more than he cared to admit. On the fourth evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner enjoying the cooler air, Josephine seemed more pensive than usual. Weston, sensing her mood, waited patiently for her to speak. "I should tell you," she finally said, staring out at the darkening landscape, "why I was running that day you found me." Weston set down the cup of coffee he'd been nursing. "Only if you're ready to share it," she nodded slowly. "I think I am. You've been so kind, taking me in without question. You deserve to know what kind of trouble might come looking for me." She took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I was engaged to be married in Kansas City. My fiancé, Edward Blackwell, is a banker there, wealthy, respected from one of the finest families. It was considered quite a match for a humble schoolteacher." Weston remained silent, noting the tension in her voice as she spoke of this man. "At first, he was charming, attentive. He courted me properly, won over the school board and my landlady with his manners and position. I thought myself fortunate." She paused, swallowing hard. "But after we were engaged, I began to see another side of him. He became controlling, critical of my clothes, my friends, my teaching methods. He wanted me to give up teaching after we married, to become a proper society wife who only concerned herself with social events and household management." "And you didn't want that," Weston surmised. "No," she agreed. "But I told myself it was normal, that all men expected such things from their wives. Until—" her voice faltered, "until I saw him lose his temper with a stable boy who he claimed had damaged his carriage. The violence in him that day frightened me. I knew then that if I married him, I would be trading my freedom for a gilded cage at best, and at worst." She didn't finish the thought, but Weston could fill in the blanks. He'd seen enough of the world to know what happened to women trapped in marriages with violent men. "So you ran," he said gently. Josephine nodded. "I tried to break the engagement properly first, went to his office at the bank to return his ring. But he wouldn't accept it, said I was being hysterical, that I'd embarrass us both, ruin his reputation. When I insisted, he grabbed my arm so hard it bruised, locked the door." She shuddered at the memory. "I managed to get away before anything worse happened, but I knew he wouldn't let me go easily." "So you left that night?" Weston asked, fighting back his anger at this unknown man who had frightened her so badly. "Yes. I packed what I could carry, took my savings and boarded the first train heading west. I traveled for days, changing directions when I could to throw off any pursuit. Eventually, I ran out of money in San Antonio. Was trying to find work there when I heard rumors that someone matching Edward's description was asking about a woman of my appearance." "That's when you left town on foot," Weston concluded. "Yes. I walked for 2 days before you found me. I'd run out of food the day before and water that morning." She looked at him directly now, her eyes clear despite the pain of the memories. "Edward has connections, Weston. Banking connections across multiple states, And he's not a man who accepts defeat gracefully, if he traces me here. Let him come, Weston said, his voice hardening. This is my land, Josephine. No one threatens anyone under my protection here. She shook her head worriedly. You don't understand. He's wealthy, influential. He could make trouble for you legally, claim I stole from him or some other falsehood. Men like Edward don't fight fairly. Neither do Texas ranchers when pushed, Weston replied with a grim smile. I appreciate your concern, truly, but I'm not without resources or friends myself. The local sheriff is a good man who doesn't take kindly to outsiders throwing their weight around. And the neighboring ranchers stand together against threats. Josephine looked unconvinced, but some of the tension had left her shoulders. I should still plan to move on eventually, perhaps California. Or, Weston suggested carefully, you could consider staying, building a life here. Teaching the children, becoming part of the community. Hiding forever is its own kind of prison, Josephine. She was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. Perhaps, she finally said. I do like it here, more than I expected to. Then stay, he urged, resisting the urge to take her hand. At least until the school is established. See how it goes. You can always leave later if you feel you must. Josephine's smile was tentative but real. All right, until the school is established at least. Weston raised his coffee cup in a small toast. To new beginnings, then. She mirrored the gesture with her own cup. To new beginnings. As they sat there in companionable silence, watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky, Weston knew he was already in deeper than was wise. Josephine Miller was bringing something to his life that had been missing, a brightness, a purpose beyond the daily work of the ranch. Whether she stayed or eventually moved on, he suspected she'd already changed his life irrevocably. And that, he decided as he stole a glance at her profile in the fading light, might not be such a bad thing after all. The following week brought the promised trip to San Antonio. Weston and Josephine set out early, traveling in a small wagon rather than on horseback to accommodate the supplies they hoped to purchase. The journey gave them several hours of uninterrupted conversation, during which Josephine shared more about her teaching experiences, and Weston told stories of his early, often comical attempts at ranching. You really had no idea what you were doing, did you? She asked, laughing at his tale of trying to milk a cow for the first time. None whatsoever, he admitted cheerfully. I'd read books about ranching, you see, thought that made me an expert. Books are valuable, she said, but there's no substitute for practical experience. A lesson I learned the hard way, he agreed. Fortunately, most of my mistakes only cost money or pride, not lives, though there was that one bull. By the time they reached San Antonio, they had covered topics ranging from literature to politics to childhood memories, finding surprising common ground despite their different backgrounds. Weston found himself increasingly drawn to Josephine's quick mind and thoughtful perspectives, while she seemed to genuinely enjoy his company, laughing more freely than she had since her arrival at the ranch. Their first stop in town was the Mercantile, where they purchased slates, chalk, pencils, paper, and a selection of basic textbooks for the school. The proprietor, Mr. Hollister, raised his eyebrows at the quantity of educational materials. Starting a school, are you, Xanders? He asked as he tallied their purchases. Miss Miller here is, Weston replied, nodding toward Josephine. She's a trained teacher setting up classes for the children from the surrounding ranches. Is that so? Hollister said, assessing Josephine with newfound interest. Well, that's good news. My sister's children live out your way with their father. My brother-in-law has the small place that borders yours to the east. They've had precious little schooling since they moved from back east. The Whitaker children? Josephine asked. Mrs. Abernathy mentioned them. They'd be most welcome at our school. I'll let my brother-in-law know, Hollister promised. He'll be pleased. Been worried about those young ones growing up without proper learning. After the mercantile, they visited several other establishments to complete their shopping. Weston insisted on purchasing fabric for Josephine to have dresses made, despite her protests. You can't keep wearing Mrs. Abernathy's altered hand-me-downs, he argued. Consider it part of your compensation for teaching. Besides, he added with a smile, I think you'd look lovely in that blue one. Josephine blushed but conceded, allowing him to purchase not only the blue fabric but also a deep green that complemented her auburn hair. Their final stop was the gunsmith, where Weston needed to pick up a repaired rifle. As they entered the shop, Josephine froze, her face suddenly pale. Weston followed her gaze to a well-dressed man examining a revolver at the counter. The stranger's back was to them, but something about him had clearly alarmed Josephine. What is it? Weston whispered, moving protectively closer to her. She shook her head minutely, already backing toward the door. Not here, she mouthed, her eyes wide with fear. Understanding immediately, Weston placed his body between her and the stranger, guiding her back outside. Once clear of the shop, Josephine took a shuddering breath. Was that him? Weston asked quietly, keeping a hand on her elbow as they moved swiftly down the boardwalk. No, she said, still trembling slightly. But I recognized him, James Foster. He works for Edward at the bank, if he's here. Then your former fiancé can't be far behind, Weston finished grimly. We should leave town. The rifle can wait. They hurried back to where they'd left the wagon, Weston scanning the streets vigilantly. As they loaded their purchases, Josephine kept her head down, a shawl pulled forward to shield her face. Just as they were preparing to depart, a voice called out from across the street. Josephine. Josephine Miller, is that you? Weston felt Josephine stiffen beside him. Turning, he saw a tall, immaculately dressed man striding toward them, his face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach his cold eyes. This, Weston knew instantly, was Edward Blackwell. Drive, Josephine whispered urgently. Please, Weston. But it was too late. Blackwell had reached them, his hand coming to rest possessively on the side of the wagon. Josephine, thank God, he said, his voice smooth as polished marble. I've been searching everywhere for you. Your sudden disappearance caused quite a stir back in Kansas City. Weston assessed the man quickly, expensively tailored suit, manicured hands, the confident bearing of someone accustomed to deference. But it was the calculation in his eyes that concerned Weston most. This was a man who viewed people as pieces on a chessboard. Mr. Blackwell, I presume, Weston said coolly, stepping between the banker and Josephine. Weston Xanders. Miss Miller is under my protection now. Blackwell's smile tightened. Ah, I see, and you are. A friend, Weston replied simply. One who respects Miss Miller's decisions. I'm sure you believe you're being gallant, Blackwell said, his tone condescending, but I'm afraid Josephine isn't well. She's been under tremendous strain preparing for our wedding. When she disappeared, her doctor suggested she might be suffering from female hysteria. I'm perfectly sane, Edward, Josephine said, finding her voice at last. She stood straighter, meeting her former fiancé's gaze directly. I left because I chose to, because I saw what marriage to you would really mean. Darling, you're confused, Blackwell said, his expression hardening despite the endearment. You're coming back with me to Kansas City. We'll forget this unfortunate episode. She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go, Weston stated firmly. Now step away from our wagon. Blackwell's hand moved slightly, revealing the butt of a pistol beneath his tailored jacket. This doesn't concern you, rancher. This is between me and my fiancée. Ex-fiancé, Josephine corrected, her voice stronger now. I returned your ring, Edward. I made my position clear. A momentary lapse in judgment, Blackwell insisted. One will rectify immediately. Come, Josephine, I have rooms at the hotel. We'll leave for Kansas City tomorrow. Weston's hand moved to his own sidearm, but before the situation could escalate further, a new voice entered the conversation. Everything all right here? Xanders? Sheriff Thomas Riley approached, his weathered face impassive but his eyes sharp as he took in the scene. Sheriff, Weston acknowledged with relief. Just a misunderstanding with this gentleman from back east. He seems to be under the impression that Miss Miller is obligated to return with him to Kansas City. Riley turned his attention to Blackwell. That true, mister? This is a private matter, Blackwell replied stiffly. Josephine is my fiancée. She's unwell and needs to return home with me. I broke our engagement, Edward, Josephine stated clearly. I am not unwell and I am not going anywhere with you. The sheriff studied her face for a moment, then nodded. Seems clear enough to me. Lady says she's not going with you, then she's not going with you. This is absurd, Blackwell sputtered. I demand, you're not in a position to demand anything in my town, mister, Riley interrupted mildly. Now, you can accept the lady's decision and go about your business, or you can continue making a scene and spend the night in my jail. Your choice. For a moment, Blackwell looked as though he might argue further. Then, with visible effort, he composed himself. Very well. But this isn't over, Josephine. I'll be staying in San Antonio for a few days. When you come to your senses, you can find me at the Grand Hotel. With that, he turned and strode away, his rigid posture betraying his anger. Thank you, Sheriff, Josephine said quietly once Blackwell was out of earshot. No trouble, Miss Miller, Riley replied. Xanders here is a good man. If he says you're under his protection, that's good enough for me. He tipped his hat to her, then gave Weston a meaningful look. Watch your back on the road home. Men like that don't take kindly to being thwarted. We will, Weston assured him. As they left town, Josephine remained tense, repeatedly glancing behind them for signs of pursuit. Weston kept the horses at a brisk pace, taking a less direct route back to the ranch to throw off any potential followers. I'm sorry, Josephine said after they'd put several miles between themselves and San Antonio. I've brought nothing but trouble to your doorstep. Nonsense, Weston replied firmly. Blackwell is the trouble, not you, and I meant what I said. You're under my protection now. He won't take you anywhere you don't want to go. Josephine studied him for a long moment. Why are you doing this, Weston? Taking these risks for someone you barely know? Weston kept his eyes on the road, choosing his words carefully. When I found you under that tree, half-starved and exhausted, something told me you were worth helping. Everything I've learned about you since has only confirmed that feeling. He glanced at her briefly, allowing himself to be more candid than perhaps was wise. You're brave, Josephine. Brave enough to leave a situation most women would have accepted out of social pressure or fear. Brave enough to start over with nothing but your wits and determination. That kind of courage deserves support, not condemnation. Josephine's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I don't feel brave. Most days I feel terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Weston said gently. It's acting despite that fear. By that measure, you're one of the bravest people I know. She didn't respond immediately, but after a moment, her hand found his where it rested on the seat between them. She squeezed it briefly, a gesture of gratitude that said more than words could. The remainder of the journey passed in watchful silence, both of them alert for any sign of pursuit. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the land. Weston was relieved to see several of his hands had stationed themselves around the property, as he'd instructed before leaving that morning, a precaution that now seemed prescient. Diego approached as they pulled up to the house. "Everything all right, boss? You took longer than expected." "We ran into some trouble in town," Weston explained, helping Josephine down from the wagon. "Miss Miller's former fiancé has tracked her to San Antonio." Diego's expression darkened. "You think he might come here?" "It's possible," Weston admitted. "Double the night patrols for the next few days, would you? And make sure everyone knows to be on the lookout for strangers." "Consider it done," Diego promised, his hand resting meaningfully on his sidearm. "No one will get to Miss Miller here." As Diego moved off to organize the increased security, Weston and Josephine carried their purchases into the house. Mrs. Abernathy took one look at Josephine's pale face and Weston's grim expression, and immediately demanded an explanation. After hearing about the encounter in town, she clucked her tongue in disapproval. "Men like that," she muttered, shaking her head, "think they own whatever they set their sights on. Well, he won't find an easy target here." She patted Josephine's hand reassuringly. "Don't you worry, dear. Between Weston, the hands, and myself, though I may be old, I'm a dead shot with a rifle that fancy banker won't get within 10 feet of you." Josephine managed a weak smile at the older woman's fierceness. "Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy. I hate that I've brought this trouble to all of you." "Nonsense," the housekeeper replied briskly. "Now, both of you sit down. I've kept dinner warm, and you look like you could use a hot meal and something stronger than coffee." As they settled at the kitchen table, Weston couldn't help but notice the shadows under Josephine's eyes, the weariness that seemed to have settled over her. The excitement and hope that had animated her during their shopping for school supplies had been replaced by the haunted look he'd seen when he first found her under that tree. "He won't take you," Weston said quietly, making sure Mrs. Abernathy was out of earshot. "I promise you that, Josephine." She met his gaze, vulnerability and determination warring in her eyes. "I believe you," she said finally, "but I'm afraid of what he might do to keep his pride intact. Edward doesn't accept defeat gracefully." "Neither do I," Weston replied simply. That night, as the ranch settled into an uneasy quiet, Weston found himself unable to sleep. He kept picturing Blackwell's cold eyes, the calculating assessment in them when he looked at Josephine. This wasn't a man in love. Weston realized this was a man whose prized possession had dared to escape his control. The thought hardened his resolve. Whatever it took, he would ensure Josephine remained free to make her own choices. Even if that eventually meant choosing to leave the ranch and him behind. The next morning brought news that did nothing to ease Weston's concerns. Thomas Jenkins rode in from town with reports that Blackwell had been asking questions about the Xanders ranch, its location, and how many men worked there. "He's offering good money for information, boss," Thomas reported grimly. "Most folks are loyal, but money talks. Won't be long before he knows exactly where to find us." Weston nodded, having expected as much. "Spread the word among the men. Anyone not familiar to us is to be stopped at the property line and questioned. No exceptions." "Already done," Thomas assured him. "Diego's got the men on rotation, watching all approaches." "But boss—" He hesitated, glancing toward the house where Josephine was helping Mrs. Abernathy prepare breakfast. "This Blackwell fella, he's hired guns in town. 3 of them. Rough-looking men, not the type to ask politely before shooting." This was a complication Weston had feared, but hoped to avoid. Hired gunmen changed the equation significantly. No longer was it just a matter of standing firm against one determined man, but potentially facing violence that could endanger everyone at the ranch. "Understood," Weston said, his jaw tight. Tell Diego I want the women and any non-essential personnel moved to the storm cellar if trouble comes, and send word to the neighboring ranches. If Blackwell's bringing a fight here, they should know about it." As Thomas rode off to deliver these messages, Weston turned toward the house, dreading the conversation he needed to have with Josephine. She'd been through enough without adding the fear of armed conflict to her burdens. He found her setting the table, humming softly as she laid out plates and cutlery. The sight of her going about such an ordinary domestic task with obvious contentment tugged at something deep in Weston's chest. In just these few weeks, she'd carved out a place for herself here, becoming integral to the rhythm of ranch life. "Josephine," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, her smile fading as she read his expression. "What's happened?" Weston saw no point in shielding her from the truth. "Blackwell's hired gunmen in town. It looks like he's planning to force the issue." Josephine set down the plate she was holding, her knuckles white with tension. "I should leave," she said immediately. "Now, before anyone gets hurt because of me." "And go where?" Weston asked gently. "He'd only follow you, and then you'd be alone with no one to help you stand against him." "I can't bear the thought of you or anyone here being harmed on my account," she insisted, her voice tight with emotion. Weston moved closer, resisting the urge to take her hands in his. "Josephine, listen to me. This isn't just about you anymore. Blackwell has challenged us on our own territory. No rancher in Texas would back down from that, regardless of the original cause." "This is madness," she whispered. "All because I refused to marry him." "No," Weston corrected firmly. "All because he believes he owns you. That's not love, Josephine, that's possession, and no human being has the right to possess another." Their eyes met, understanding passing between them. After a moment, Josephine nodded slowly. "What can I do to help?" she asked, squaring her shoulders with renewed determination. "For now, continue as normal. Help Mrs. Abernathy prepare for the possibility that we might need to take shelter in the storm cellar. Make sure the school supplies are secured somewhere safe." He managed a small smile. "After all, when this is over, we still have a school to open." His confidence seemed to steady her. "You truly believe we'll get through this?" "I do," he assured her. "Blackwell may have money and hired guns, but we have something stronger, people who are fighting for their home and for what's right." The next 2 days passed in tense preparation. Weston set up defensive positions around the ranch house and outbuildings, distributed ammunition, and made sure everyone knew what to do if trouble arrived. Neighboring ranchers, hearing of the situation, sent men to bolster Weston's forces, a show of frontier solidarity that touched Josephine deeply. "I never expected such kindness from strangers," she confessed to Weston as they watched 3 riders from the Reynolds Ranch arrive with rifles and provisions. "Out here, neighbors stand together," Weston explained. "Has to be that way. The land's too harsh, the dangers too many for people to survive alone." On the morning of the 3rd day since their return from San Antonio, the confrontation they'd been bracing for finally came. Weston was checking the corral fences when Diego galloped up from his patrol position. "They're coming," he reported tersely. "Blackwell and 7 men, all armed, about 20 minutes out." Weston nodded grimly. "Get everyone in position. I'll warn the women." Inside the house, Josephine and Mrs. Abernathy were already moving with purpose, having spotted Diego's urgent approach. "Is it time?" Mrs. Abernathy asked, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Yes," Weston confirmed. "They'll be here soon. You both need to get to the cellar now." "Not yet," Josephine said, surprising him. She stood in the center of the kitchen, a rifle in her hands, one of Weston's own that he kept mounted above the fireplace. "I need to speak with Edward first." Josephine, that's too dangerous, Weston protested. This is my fight, she insisted. I won't hide while others risk their lives for me. Let me try to reason with him one last time. If he sees me standing with you all, choosing this place and these people of my own free will, perhaps. You think he'll listen to reason? Weston asked skeptically. No, she admitted. But I need to try. I need to face him, Weston. For myself. Looking into her determined eyes, Weston understood. This wasn't just about avoiding bloodshed, it was about Josephine reclaiming her power, refusing to be intimidated into hiding. All right, he conceded. But you stay on the porch, behind cover. And at the first sign that talking isn't working, you get inside. Promise me. I promise, she agreed. Mrs. Abernathy snorted. Well, if she's staying, so am I. Been wanting to have words with this fancy banker myself. She pulled a shotgun from a cabinet Weston hadn't even known concealed weapons. Don't look so surprised, boy. Woman my age living on the frontier. Course I'm armed. Despite the gravity of the situation, Weston found himself smiling at the fierce determination of both women. They were cut from the same cloth. He realized different generations, different backgrounds, but sharing the same indomitable spirit. By the time Blackwell and his men rode into view, the Xanders ranch was ready. Weston and Josephine stood on the front porch with Mrs. Abernathy slightly behind them. Diego and the other ranch hands were positioned strategically around the property, rifles at the ready but not yet aimed. Blackwell reined his horse to a stop about 30 yards from the house. Even at that distance, his fury was evident in the rigid set of his shoulders. Beside him rode the 3 hired guns. Thomas had mentioned rough-looking men with cold eyes and weathered faces. The other 4 men appeared to be bank employees or associates, less comfortable on horseback and clearly nervous about the potential for violence. Josephine, Blackwell called out, his voice carrying across the open space between them. This charade has gone on long enough. Come out now and no one needs to get hurt. I'm right here, Edward, she replied, stepping forward slightly so he could see her clearly. And I'm not hiding or being held against my will. I've made my choice. Blackwell's face darkened. You're not thinking clearly. These people have filled your head with nonsense. You belong in Kansas City with me. I belong wherever I choose to be, Josephine countered firmly. Our engagement is over, Edward. Go back to Kansas City and leave me in peace. This isn't about what you want, Blackwell snapped, his composure cracking. It's about what's proper, what's been arranged. Do you have any idea the embarrassment you've caused me? The questions I've had to endure, Josephine shook her head sadly. That's all you care about, isn't it? Your reputation, your pride, not my happiness or well-being. Don't be dramatic, Blackwell scoffed. You would have wanted for nothing as my wife. Except freedom, she replied simply. Except the right to teach, to have my own thoughts, to live without fear of your temper. Those aren't things I'm willing to sacrifice, not for all the comfort in the world. Weston watched the exchange silently, noting how Blackwell's men shifted uneasily in their saddles. This public rejection was clearly not what the banker had anticipated. This is your final chance, Josephine, Blackwell warned, his hand moving toward his holstered pistol. Come with me now, or I'll have my men take you by force. That was enough for Weston. He stepped forward, placing himself partially in front of Josephine. That won't be happening, he stated calmly. Miss Miller has made her decision. I suggest you respect it and leave our property. Your property? Blackwell laughed harshly. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with, rancher? I could buy and sell this entire county if I wanted to. Maybe in Kansas City money talks that loud, Weston replied, unimpressed. But out here we value different things. Honor, respect, a person's right to choose their own path. Before Blackwell could respond, a new voice entered the conversation. "Mighty fine words, Xanders. Couldn't have said it better myself." Sheriff Riley rode into view from behind the house, accompanied by 6 deputies. They positioned themselves to the side, effectively surrounding Blackwell and his men. "Sheriff," Blackwell acknowledged stiffly, "this doesn't concern you. It's a private matter between myself and my fiancée." "Ex-fiancée," Riley corrected mildly. "And when 8 armed men ride onto peaceful property with clear intent to cause trouble, it becomes very much my concern." He nodded toward Josephine. "The lady's made her preference clear, sir. I suggest you accept that and move on." Blackwell's face flushed with anger and humiliation. He looked from the sheriff to Weston, then to Josephine, who stood tall and unafraid on the porch. "This isn't over," he spat. "Yes," Josephine said with quiet finality, "it is." For a tense moment, it seemed Blackwell might order his men to fight despite the overwhelming odds against them. Then one of the hired guns leaned over and muttered something in his ear. Whatever was said seemed to penetrate the banker's rage, for his shoulders slumped slightly in defeat. "Fine," he said coldly. "Keep her. She's damaged goods anyway. No proper man would want her now." Weston's hand instinctively moved to his gun, but Josephine's touch on his arm stopped him. She shook her head slightly. Blackwell wasn't worth it. "I think it's time you gentlemen headed back to town," Sheriff Riley suggested, his friendly tone belied by the steel in his eyes. "My deputies will escort you to ensure you find your way without any detours." Blackwell glared at them all one final time, then yanked his horse's reins, turning the animal sharply. Without another word, he and his men rode away, flanked by Riley's deputies. The sheriff remained behind, approaching the house once Blackwell was well out of earshot. "I don't think he'll be back," Riley said, dismounting. "Men like that care too much about saving face. Being run off twice will be humiliation enough. But just in case, I'll make sure he and his men leave the county." "Thank you, Sheriff," Josephine said sincerely, "for everything." Riley tipped his hat to her. "Just doing my job, Miss Miller. Though I have to say, you showed real courage standing up to him like that." As the sheriff departed and the ranch hands began to stand down from their defensive positions, Josephine turned to Weston, her face radiant with relief and something deeper, something that made his heart race. "It's over," she said wonderingly. "Truly over." "Yes," he agreed, allowing himself to take her hand now that the danger had passed. "You're free to make your own choices now, whatever they may be." Josephine looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, her blue eyes clear and certain. "I think I already have." In that moment, with the Texas sun shining down on them and the future stretching wide open before them, Weston knew that finding Josephine Miller asleep beneath that tree had been the greatest stroke of fortune in his life. Whatever came next, they would face it together, not because either one possessed the other, but because they both chose it freely. In the weeks that followed, life at the Xanders ranch settled into a new rhythm. True to Sheriff Riley's prediction, Edward Blackwell returned to Kansas City without further incident, his pride wounded but his influence limited so far from his financial empire. Josephine, free from the shadow of his pursuit, flourished in her new life. The schoolroom she'd envisioned became reality, set up in the renovated bunkhouse common room. Children from 5 neighboring ranches began attending 3 days a week, riding in on horseback, or coming by wagon with older siblings or parents. Josephine's natural talent for teaching, combined with her genuine care for each student, quickly earned her the respect and affection of both the children and their families. Weston found himself increasingly drawn to the schoolroom during breaks in his ranch work, ostensibly to check on the building or make repairs, but in reality to watch Josephine in her element. The joy that animated her features as she guided a student through a difficult math problem or praised a particularly well-written composition touched him deeply. This was a woman who had found her purpose, who brought light into the lives of others through her gifts. One afternoon in late September, as the summer heat finally began to relent, Weston lingered after the students had departed. Josephine was organizing papers at her makeshift desk, humming softly to herself. Her hair was coming loose from its pins after a long day of teaching, and a smudge of chalk dust adorned her cheek. Weston thought she had never looked more beautiful. "Successful day?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Josephine looked up, her face brightening at the sight of him. "Very." Young Samuel Whittaker finally conquered his multiplication tables, and little Emma Henderson read an entire page without stumbling once. "Impressive," Weston said with a smile. "They're lucky to have you." "I'm the lucky one," she countered, setting down her papers. "6 weeks ago I was running for my life with no plan, no future. Now," she gestured around the simple classroom, "now I have all of this: purpose, community, a place where I belong." The perfect opening presented itself, and Weston gathered his courage. "Speaking of belonging," he said, crossing the room to stand before her, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Josephine's eyes widened slightly, a blush rising to her cheeks. "Yes. I've grown mighty fond of you, Josephine Miller," he began, his voice rougher than usual with emotion. "More than fond, if I'm being honest. These past weeks, having you here at the ranch, seeing you with the children, sharing meals and conversations." He took a deep breath. "What I'm trying to say, not very eloquently, is that I've fallen in love with you." Josephine's lips parted in surprise, though the joy that lit her features told him she wasn't displeased by the confession. "I know it hasn't been long," he continued quickly. "And I know you came here running from a man who tried to control you. The last thing I want is for you to feel pressured or obligated in any way. But I'd be honored if you'd consider courting properly. No rush, no expectations beyond getting to know each other better with an eye toward, well, toward a future together, if that's what you want too." Josephine was silent for a moment, her eyes searching his face. Just as Weston began to worry he'd spoken too soon, she stepped forward and placed her hand gently on his chest, directly over his heart. "Weston Xanders," she said softly, "from the moment you woke me under that tree and asked when I'd last eaten, you've shown me nothing but kindness, respect, and understanding. You've defended my freedom without trying to make my decisions for me. You've supported my dreams without seeking to replace them with your own." She took a steadying breath. "What I'm trying to say, perhaps more eloquently than you give me credit for, is that I've fallen in love with you too." The simple declaration made Weston's heart soar. Carefully, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he gathered her hands in his. "So, you'll allow me to court you properly?" Josephine laughed, the sound like music in the quiet schoolroom. "Yes, although I'd say we've had quite an unusual courtship already. Most couples don't face down armed men together before their first official outing." "We've never done things the conventional way," Weston agreed with a grin. "No reason to start now." With exquisite gentleness, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a first, tentative kiss. Josephine responded with a sweetness that made his heart ache, her hands moving to rest lightly on his shoulders. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Josephine smiled up at him. "I should warn you, I'm still determined to maintain my independence. I won't give up teaching, even if our relationship progresses further." "I wouldn't dream of asking you to," Weston assured her. "Your passion for teaching is part of what I love about you. Besides," he added with a twinkle in his eye, "the ranch could use a proper school." Makes it easier to attract good hands if they know their children can get an education nearby. Josephine's expression softened. You've thought about this, haven't you? About how it could work with me teaching and being part of your life. I've thought of little else, he admitted. Though I draw the line at having the entire school in our house. The current arrangement seems adequate. Our house, she repeated, catching the implication with a raised eyebrow. Weston flushed, realizing his presumption. I meant, that is, someday perhaps if you were amenable. Josephine saved him from his stammering by rising on her tiptoes to kiss him again, briefly but tenderly. Someday, she agreed. If we find we suit, as they say. But let's take our time, shall we? I've learned the hard way that rushing into an engagement isn't wise. We have all the time in the world, Weston assured her. No need to hurry what's meant to be. As they walked hand in hand back toward the main house, the setting sun painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber, Weston marveled at the twists of fate that had brought them together. A chance discovery under an oak tree had changed both their lives irrevocably, leading them toward a future neither could have imagined just months before. Mrs. Abernathy, watching their approach from the porch, smiled knowingly to herself. She'd seen the way they looked at each other, recognized the inevitable conclusion to their story long before either of them had admitted their feelings. Some things, the old woman reflected, were simply meant to be. About time, she muttered as they reached the steps, their clasped hands telling her all she needed to know. Was beginning to think I'd have to lock you two in the root cellar to get you to see sense. Weston laughed, while Josephine blushed prettily. No need for such drastic measures, Mrs. A, he assured the housekeeper. We've come to an understanding. HMPH, the older woman snorted, but her eyes were twinkling. Well, understanding or not, dinner's getting cold. Come eat before I feed it to the chickens. As they followed Mrs. Abernathy inside, Josephine squeezed Weston's hand gently. Is she always this accepting of change? She whispered. Only changes she approves of, he replied quietly. She's been hoping for this since the day you arrived. Over the following months, their courtship progressed with a sweet naturalness that convinced both Weston and Josephine of the rightness of their connection. They discovered shared interests in literature and music, complementary perspectives on ranch management and education, and a mutual respect that formed the foundation of their deepening relationship. By Christmas, the entire community had come to accept them as a couple. The holiday celebration at the ranch, attended by neighboring families, ranch hands, and Josephine's students, became a joyous affirmation of the community they had built together. It was on a crisp January evening, as they sat before the fireplace in the ranch house's cozy sitting room, that Weston finally asked the question that had been on his mind for weeks. Josephine, he said, taking her hand as she looked up from the book she'd been reading aloud to him. I've been trying to think of some elaborate, romantic way to do this, but the truth is, I just can't wait any more. Setting her book aside, Josephine turned to face him fully, her expression curious but unafraid. Weston slid from his chair to one knee before her, producing a small velvet box from his pocket. I love you, he said simply. Not just for your beauty or your kindness, though you possess both in abundance. I love your strength, your determination, your unwavering commitment to what you believe is right. I love the way you've made this ranch a true home, not just for me but for everyone who lives and works here. He opened the box to reveal a ring not ostentatious like the one Edward had given her, but a delicate band of gold set with a single, perfect sapphire that matched the blue of her eyes. I'm not asking you to give up any part of yourself, he continued. Your teaching, your independence, your dreams, they're all part of who you are, and who you are is who I love. I'm asking if you'll share your life with mine, build something together that's stronger than what either of us could create alone. Josephine Miller, will you marry me?" Tears welled in Josephine's eyes as she looked from the ring to Weston's hopeful face. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Weston Xanders, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, she added with characteristic thoughtfulness, "But I want to keep teaching. And I think I'd like to keep my name for professional purposes. The children and parents all know me as Miss Miller." Weston laughed, rising to sit beside her and gather her in his arms. "Josephine Miller Xanders has a fine ring to it," he agreed. "And as for teaching, I wouldn't have it any other way. In fact," he added, his expression growing serious, "I've been thinking about building a proper schoolhouse on the ranch, something permanent with room for more students as the community grows." Josephine's eyes widened. "Really? You do that? For you? And for all the children who deserve an education," he confirmed. "We could make it official, apply to the county for recognition as a proper school district. With your qualifications, they'd have to approve it." "Weston," she breathed, overcome with emotion, That would be wonderful." "Consider it my wedding present to you," he said, sealing the promise with a tender kiss. They were married in April, when the wildflowers painted the Texas landscape in vibrant colors. The ceremony took place under the very oak tree where Weston had found Josephine that fateful day, now adorned with ribbons and lanterns for the occasion. Sheriff Riley officiated. Mrs. Abernathy cried, despite her protests, that she was just bothered by pollen, and the entire community gathered to celebrate. As Josephine and Weston exchanged vows, the symbolism of their chosen location was lost on no one. The place that had once represented Josephine's lowest moment, exhausted, hungry, and alone, had been transformed into the site of her greatest joy. It was a powerful testament to how life could change, how despair could give way to hope, how endings could become beginnings. "When I found you here," Weston said softly during his vows, audible only to Josephine and those standing closest, "I had no idea I was finding my heart, my partner, my future. Thank you for trusting me enough to wake up, for being brave enough to start over, for loving me enough to stay." "When you found me here," Josephine replied, her voice steady despite the tears shimmering in her eyes, "you didn't just ask me when I'd last eaten. You fed my body, my mind, and eventually my heart. I promised to spend the rest of our lives returning that gift, nurturing what we've found together, building a home and a legacy based on respect, passion, and love." As the community celebrated late into the evening, feasting and dancing under the stars, Mrs. Abernathy found herself sitting beside Sheriff Riley, watching the newlyweds waltz to the music of a local fiddler. "Never seen two people better matched," the sheriff observed, sipping from his cup of punch. "Meant to be," Mrs. Abernathy agreed with unusual sentimentality. "From the moment he brought her home, half-starved and scared as a rabbit, I knew she was the one who'd finally tame our Weston," Riley chuckled. "Tame? That man. He's as wild as this land always will be." "Not tame, then," the housekeeper amended. "Complete. She completes him and he completes her. Two halves of the same soul, my mother would have said." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," Riley commented. Mrs. Abernathy smiled, watching as Weston twirled Josephine under his arm, both of them laughing with pure joy. "That she was, Sheriff. That she was." The years that followed brought all the expected challenges and joys of married life on the frontier, but Josephine and Weston faced them together, their bond strengthening with each trial overcome, each triumph celebrated. The schoolhouse Weston had promised was completed by their first anniversary, a sturdy building with large windows to capture the Texas light, built on a gentle rise overlooking the ranch. It quickly became the heart of the community, hosting not just daily classes but also social gatherings, church services, and local government meetings. Josephine's reputation as an educator grew throughout the county and beyond. Former students who went on to succeed in business or academia often returned to thank her for the foundation she had provided. She never lost her passion for teaching, continuing to develop innovative methods that engaged even the most reluctant learners. Weston, meanwhile, expanded the ranch operations with thoughtful care, implementing new breeding techniques and land management practices that increased productivity while preserving the natural beauty of their holdings. Under his stewardship, the Xanders Ranch became known as one of the most progressive and successful cattle operations in the region. Their family grew as well. Their first child, a son they named Thomas after Sheriff Riley, arrived just shy of their second anniversary. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Elizabeth, named for Josephine's mother. Both children inherited their parents' intelligence and determination, growing up with the dual advantages of their father's practical ranching knowledge and their mother's academic guidance. Through it all, Josephine and Weston maintained the balance they had established from the beginning: mutual respect for each other's domains, shared decision-making on matters affecting their family, and a love that only deepened with time and experience. On the 10th anniversary of the day Weston found Josephine under the oak tree, they returned to the spot for a private picnic, leaving their children in Mrs. Abernathy's capable care for the afternoon. The tree had grown taller and broader, just as their love had expanded to encompass children, community, and a shared legacy. "You ever regret it?" Weston asked as they sat on a blanket in the dappled shade, a feast spread before them. "Taking a chance on a stranger who found you half-starved under a tree," Josephine laughed, the sound as melodious as it had been when he first heard it. "Never," she said firmly. "Not even during our worst arguments or most difficult times. Not even when I insisted we needed that new bull that nearly trampled the chicken coop," he teased. "Well, perhaps a momentary regret then," she conceded with a smile. "But no, Weston, finding you, or rather being found by you, was the greatest blessing of my life." He reached across the picnic basket to take her hand, his thumb brushing over the wedding band that had joined the sapphire engagement ring. "When I asked when you'd last eaten, I never imagined I was starting a conversation that would last a lifetime." "The best conversations do," she replied softly. "And ours is far from over." As they packed up their picnic and rode back toward the ranch house, where their children would be eagerly awaiting their return, Josephine reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a terrified young woman fleeing a controlling fiancé to a respected teacher, beloved wife, and mother, she had transformed her life through courage and the love of the man beside her. The oak tree receded behind them, but its significance in their story remained. It stood as a reminder that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures, that what looks like an ending can become the most beautiful beginning, and that a simple act of kindness, waking someone gently and offering food to the hungry, can change the course of multiple lives forever. And as the Xanders Ranch came into view, with its thriving school, productive fields, and the home they had built together, both Josephine and Weston knew with absolute certainty that they had found in each other not just love, but a true partnership that would endure for all their days.